the system to bring us everything from mail to medication, and also talked about how businesses owning constituents are asking for more PPP assistance. Okay, we're not streaming, so I'm going to stop talking. Okay. Lucy, our technical issues have continued, so we're going to start over, and you're going to just have to act like that was the first time you've heard any of those things. Good afternoon, Fairbanks Chamber members. For those of you I have not met yet, my name is Marissa Shera, and I'm the president and CEO of the Fairbanks Chamber, standing in today for our board chair, Sabrina Binkley, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but she will be back next week. For those of you that have been hanging around for a few minutes waiting for us to come on live, we apologize for our quick little delay this morning, but we are here and on program. I would like to take a moment, as we do each week, to thank each of our executive partners whose logos you hopefully saw on the screens before we got started today. These businesses are the backbone of our business community and a pillar of strength here at the Fairbanks Chamber. Their support is not only financial, but often these businesses are providing the Chamber and our advocacy committees the knowledge and information that they need to inform our advocacy process and support the policy that makes Fairbanks and our state the best environment possible to do business. A full list of our executive partners can be found on our website. Now I'd like to welcome Brenna Shockey from my team here online to help us recognize and announce our new and renewing members. Brenna, take it away.
Thank you, Marissa. We'd like to recognize our renewing members, starting with Chugach Creamery, also known as Cold Stone, Bettysworth North Architects and Planners, Loa Carroll Hubbard Allstate Insurance, the 168th Refueling Wing at Eielson, the Turtle Club, Dollar Rent-A-Car, Thrifty Rentals, Greg Martin Photography, Great Alaska Bowl Company, Pioneers of Alaska Igloo No. 4, Spruce Tree Montessori School, and Bart LeBon. We'd also like to thank those members that have joined our 110% Club today, which means that these members donated above and beyond their membership investment to help us with our advocacy actions. And those members today are Microcom, Alaska West Express, Matthew D. Raymond State Farm Insurance, A&A Roofing, and GCR Tires and Service. Thank you. Today's membership minute is actually a new feature that our chamber has added to our membership directory category listings, and something that you as a member can now opt into. We wanted to celebrate and recognize the diversity of our membership and have now added new categories that you can opt into if you so choose to. Those are including women-owned, veteran-owned, African-American, Alaska Native, Pacific Islander, and many more. If you have any that you think that we might have missed, please feel free to reach out. Or if you'd like to opt into any of those categories, and there are more that I did not list, you can do so by logging into your Chamber Master website portal, or you can reach out to any of the team members here at the Fairbanks Chamber. And today, I'd also like to take a moment to thank a member that has gone above and beyond to help other members. That's Alaska Pipeline Service Company. They reached out to help some of our nonprofit members that were struggling financially renew their chamber membership so that they could also have a voice still in the chamber as well as in the business community. They recognize that this is an important time for those nonprofits to be involved and to be at the table. So we appreciate Alaska Pipeline Service Company for helping another member and members, and also helping the chamber by making sure that they're well represented. Thank you. Back to you, Marissa.
Great. Thank you so much, Brenna. One of the things that I love each week is hearing Brenna give an update on our new and renewing members. And one thing that I want to brag on Brenna a little bit about is that our chamber, despite significant challenges for our businesses due to COVID-19 and other issues in that basket, we have an incredible retention rate of our members. So it's 97%, which I don't know if that means anything to folks in the non-chamber world, but that's exceptional even as you benchmark normal chamber membership directories across industry. So we're really proud of that, and we take that as a signal of strength of our chamber membership, and also a signal of the value that you place in our organization and the information that we can help bring to you each week. So for all of our members, thank you so much for your continued support and in our efforts to help deliver value to your business and to your employees and to our community. Again, today I am acting on behalf of Sabrina as well as myself. So on behalf of Sabrina and the board of directors, I did want to let folks know that our board met yesterday, and we heard from University of Alaska Regent Karen Perdue and interim president Pat Pitney. It was a great opportunity to hear from UA leadership on budget issues, leadership changes, and COVID mitigation and response. It was also a great opportunity to hear from Pat Pitney so early in her interim role and to see that she's seated right here in Fairbanks. Our Government Relations Committee heard this morning from the Commissioner of the Department of Education, Dr. Michael Johnson, to hear about the Smart Start framework established by the state for districts to refer to as they plan for education delivery going into this academic year. To learn more about Smart Start, please visit aklearns.org. We also heard from U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski with some updates from Congress. As chair of the Senate Energy Committee, the senator was happy to report on the announcement of the approval for release sales to occur in the 1002 region of ANWR. The senator also discussed targeted COVID funds to help schools reopen, the importance of the United States Postal Service in Alaska, where many of us live in rural areas and have a high demand on the system to bring us everything from mail to medication. And she also talked about how business owning constituents are asking for more PPP assistance as challenges related to COVID-19 continue to plague many businesses. She touched on the Minerals Security Act and how that legislation is ready to hit the Senate floor next month, and how minerals developed in our own country will help us to reduce dependency on others in a time when global markets are vulnerable. Finally, she gave a grim update about the US Census and how Alaska is ranked 50th in terms of response rate, and how we only recently crossed the 50% rate. She urged Alaskans to participate and reminded the committee that we'll live with these numbers for the next 10 years, and those will impact funding for childcare, roads, housing, water, and so much more. You can participate online or be sure to respond if a U.S. Census taker visits your home. You can also actively help spread the word about the importance of participating in the U.S. Census by sharing information with your employees, coworkers, and family. Now I'd like to move on to my report and talk a little bit about what we're doing inside the chamber here. We are excited to be gearing up for Leadership Fairbanks class of 2021. Enrollment is open, and the deadline to get enrolled is September 4th at 5 p.m. You can go to fairbankschamber.org/leadershipfairbanks to read all about what's on the horizon for the class of 2021. But what is Leadership Fairbanks? And this is our most common question. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about that program and what exactly it is. So this year it's an online program facilitated by the Fairbanks Chamber and Jeff Welch, designed to help emerging and established leaders expand their existing leadership skills through exposure to challenging ideas, insights from community leaders, lively discussion, and personal reflection. Participation in Leadership Fairbanks is an inspiring, and challenging experience in which you will develop lifelong relationships and established and emerging leaders in our community while learning the skills necessary to become a valued leader in your organization and in our community. Your cohort of about 20 emerging and established leaders will participate in this 9-month-long program that will enable you to enhance your leadership skills, broaden your perspectives, and build meaningful professional relationships. Each student is a collaborator in the program and as such is expected to contribute diverse ideas and valuable perspectives to others in your cohort. As participants, you must demonstrate a passion for people and the future of our region and a personal commitment to help improve the quality of life in Fairbanks. You must have a commitment to the community through current and past activities and a willingness to commit the requisite time and energy to complete this program, which requires the full support of your organization. If you or someone in your organization would make a good candidate for this program, please take time to encourage that person to enroll. We have an exciting and adapted plan for the developing leaders in your organization, and we know that they will appreciate your support of their development. A new development this year with Leadership Fairbanks is the creation of a scholarship that was designed to increase diversity and inclusion in our Leadership Fairbanks program. Interested applicants can read more about it on the Leadership Fairbanks page, where the applications can be found. The deadline for scholarship applications is also September 4th. If you've got any questions about that, please email Katie. Businesses can support Leadership Fairbanks by becoming a series sponsor for only $500. There are many benefits and opportunities for added exposure for the duration of this program. Thank you so much to our early sponsors. Those are Mac Federal Credit Union, ConocoPhillips Alaska, Wells Fargo Alaska, Usabelli Coal Mine, and Summers Sotheby's International Realty. Thank you all for your support. As a 2013 graduate of this program, I can attest that I still benefit from the development this program offered and the connections that I was able to make as a participant. I would welcome questions anytime from anyone interested in pursuing this individually or for someone in your organization. And my last announcement today from the Chamber is that if you are in need of a professional headshot, whether you're a new professional or if you need to update your presence in our virtual and online spaces, we have this opportunity for you, our members. Greg Martin Photography will be holding a pop-up headshot session at our Chamber office next Thursday, which is the 27th. You can find that event on our calendar and go there to reserve your session. You can click the link that Katie is posting in this chat session here as well. You can find information about all of these things and more on our website at fairbankschamber.org, or of course, you can give us a call anytime. Now I'd like to move on to our main presentation. Although none of us have a crystal ball about what the future post-pandemic world may hold, it is certain that we have and are experiencing the effects of COVID-19 for the foreseeable future. We're happy to have Muhsin Gutabi here to share his predictions for the economic repercussions and the forecast moving forward. Dr. Gutabi is an associate professor of economics at ICER with his PhD in economics from Oklahoma State University. His fields of specialization are regional and urban economics, health economics, and applied microeconomics. Before coming to ICER, he was a research economist at the Center for Applied Economic Research at Oklahoma State University, where he conducted public policy analysis, regional economic development, and economic forecasting. At ICER, his recent work includes assessing the economic impacts of the fiscal options, analyzing the state spending, and updating ICER's economic forecasting model. His academic work uses quasi-experimental methods to evaluate the effect of policy shocks and on outcomes of interest. Thank you so much, Dr. Gutabi, for joining us today. Take it away.
Thank you for having me, Marissa. Yeah, as you said, nobody has a crystal ball, and I certainly don't. But what I would like to do today is try and paint a picture of what I think is potentially going to happen to the Alaska economy. I'll start by saying that this is not a Fairbanks-centric forecast. I'll talk a little bit about Fairbanks, but I'll talk about how COVID-19 has affected the Alaska economy, what are the sectors that have been hardest hit, and what the outlook potentially tells us for the next 2 to 3 years. There is, as you said, a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Economic forecasting in general is a difficult undertaking. In the midst of a pandemic, sometimes it feels like a fool's errand because obviously there is quite a bit of uncertainty surrounding the pandemic and the virus. But I'll speak about many caveats that are associated with the forecast, but hopefully I'll give you enough data points to develop a sense of where I'm coming from And you can make your own decisions as to whether or not the forecast is too rosy or aligned with what you think is going to happen. Next slide, please. Yeah, go through. Next one. Yeah, so anything, can you go back one? Sorry. I just want to point out that I've shared with Marissa the presentation. What's in blue here is the link to the actual economic forecast. So I'm not going to be able to get into all the details that the forecast explains in the document. But if you click on that link, it takes you to the ICER webpage, which includes the actual economic forecast. Next page, please. And if you could just show the whole page, that would be great. Yeah, so I'll just start with some things that I think we're all familiar with. The number of unemployment insurance claims has just ballooned in the state, right? And so historically, we average about 900 initial unemployment claims. These are basically new unemployed people that filed for unemployment insurance. We average less than 1,000 per year at state level. Since the pandemic started, we've been averaging a little more over 8,500, actually about 8,700. And that's an incredibly high number and indicates, again, just the scale of the crisis that we're experiencing. Perhaps the more relevant number is the number of continuing claims. These are people that are continually receiving unemployment insurance benefits, and there are more than 40,000 of those. That's without counting self-employed individuals who also have been able to receive unemployment benefits for the very first time. And so to me, those numbers essentially alone tell us that this is a very, very different crisis than what we've had in the past. To put those numbers in perspective, between 2015 and 2018, the state lost a little more than 11,000 jobs during Alaska's longest recession. And in just 5 months, we've had more than 100,000 filings for unemployment insurance. And right now we're averaging about 40,000 or a little more than 40,000 continuing claims. So it's already dwarfed in terms of scale Alaska's longest recession. Clearly, the reasons for this decline are very different. Another metric that people like to pay attention to, which is the unemployment rate, has essentially doubled. We were at historic lows in terms of the unemployment rate. In June, we were at basically 12.5%. And I'll mention this quite a bit. I'm not going to have time to go through it, but economic data comes out with a very, very significant lag. What I mean by that is historically, we don't get May employment numbers till October. And so what I've been doing is relying a lot on real-time or near real-time data sets that have just come out. And I use a lot in my work. If you go to tracktherecovery.org, I don't know how many of you spend time on that website, but it's a phenomenal collaboration between Harvard and Brown and some nonprofits that collect near real-time data from every state that show spending, number of businesses that are open, or business revenues, and so it's by Opportunity Insights, and like I said, it's tracktherecovery.org. So I've been using that quite a bit, and I've also been using foot traffic data. Google Mobility Reports and SafeGraph have allowed the sharing of essentially anonymized cell phone data that allows us to see whether or not people are abiding by the mandates, whether or not people are going back out to restaurants. And those, I've used both of those in order to get a sense of what's happening in real time in Alaska, and use that quite a bit in the forecast. And so if you go to the document, I show spending declines by category in restaurants and hotels and healthcare establishments. And what you can see in all of them is basically we fell off a cliff immediately when the virus fears were at their highest, and then we've been climbing back up. As of this morning, when I checked, The latest numbers are for the first week of August. Spending in Alaska as of the first week of August is about 6.5% lower than it was in January. Now, this is not seasonally adjusted, so you have to be careful. Remember, I mean, as you all know, spending and employment in Alaska balloons over the summer. And so right now, this is lower than January. And in fact, historically, we obviously are much, much higher than January over the summer. And so the declines are fairly pronounced, but it's important to note that we've been kind of slowly climbing our way out of the depth of the recession. But as I'll say in a little bit, the idea of a V-shaped recovery was nonsensical to start with, and it's just not going to happen because there are no catalysts to make it happen. And now we're obviously dealing with this resurgence of the virus, so it complicates the picture a little bit. If you could go to the next slide, please. And so I'll speak a little bit about the national picture because, again, in building my Alaska-specific forecast, I realized the Federal Reserve puts out forecasts at the national level. And there's been mixed information coming from federal agencies. There are some numbers that look really, really strong, and people think that they indicate that we're basically getting back to normal fairly soon. However, the Fed's forecast from a GDP perspective and an employment perspective points to a much, much slower recovery because, again, we have about 18 or 19 million people that are still unemployed. We've had some construction numbers that are strong, some retail numbers that are strong, but I will caution that much of that increase in spending was largely driven by the very, very generous federal assistance programs that have obviously dried up right now, and we're in limbo about when this next package potentially comes. And so I don't want to call the recovery artificial, but it's very much supported by very generous unemployment benefits, by support to businesses, which is great and obviously was needed. But right now, as I'm sure many of you have seen and you think about it in your everyday businesses, we've entered this income cliff period where a lot of the aid that has come towards the state and to every state has basically halted. Right now, we're talking about unemployment benefits essentially being cut in half. We don't know if there is more aid to businesses, and we don't know if there is direct aid coming to the state. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but if you add up all the monies that have flowed to Alaska since the beginning of the pandemic, it's about $3 to $3.5 billion with a B, depending on how you want to count. And that's about 7% of GDP. So at the national level, obviously that's in the trillions of dollars, and that's supported this partial recovery. But again, we have a lot of people that are unemployed, and we have a lot of action that has taken place at the federal level that has put holds on mortgage evictions, on mortgage defaults, on evictions. And so it's unclear what's hovering below the surface if more aid doesn't come to bridge us to the other side. And so I say all of this to basically just reiterate that we need to be careful in interpreting good data. It's fantastic that things are looking up, but we need to kind of be careful and disentangle why this data has rebounded as fast as it did. And again, partially stimulus money, partially generous unemployment benefits, and support for businesses. Next slide, please. So so this is what I was talking about. This is arguably the most important thing that we're dealing with right now, and it's this income cliff. I've been discussing it for the last 2 months, and to me, generosity of aid is going to determine the pace, the shape, and the speed of this recovery. There is no doubt about that, because as much as people worry about the debt and the deficit, and those are real concerns, I think that right now the most important thing is to keep businesses as whole or as near whole as possible, households in good enough shape, and make sure that state and local balance sheets are kept as solid as possible to get us to the other side of this recession. Because as I've said, removing so think about the unemployment benefits specifically. So we've had we've averaged 40-some thousand people on continuing claims. The federal unemployment insurance boost was $600 per week per person. So just doing back of the envelope math, that's $100 million per month that was coming to Alaska, right? And so in the 2 or 3 weeks since the expiration, that's $100 million less. That's obviously helping people at the individual level, but also a lot of it has been going to stores, to businesses, to restaurants. And now we're talking about this $300 that maybe will last for 3 weeks. So again, massive amount of uncertainty. We know that PPP, while it was fantastic, a lot of businesses have already gone through it. So take everything that I'm going to say with a grain of salt, because there are policy shocks that are likely going to change the course of this recovery, right? And so if there is absolutely no more aid coming, then that puts downward pressure on the forecast. And so I'm going to be talking about these things as headwinds, right? And so these are all headwinds for the forecast because, again, less money flowing in the economy, businesses not able to retain workers, local governments having to lay off workers are all potential dangers if some of this aid doesn't come. My assumption in the forecast is that a lot of this aid, the second package I was assuming, was going to be between $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion at the national level. And so I'm assuming, so all the numbers that I'm going to show you are assuming a fairly strong assistance program. Now, obviously, that's in question. Next slide, please. So this is, if you only had to look at one picture in order to kind of determine the scale of the issue, I think that this does a fairly good job. These are initial unemployment insurance claims, and they're just raw unemployment insurance claims. So these are individual claims in every single week that are filed by people essentially that have been laid off or are trying to essentially get unemployment insurance benefits. And as you can see, for 2019, as I've said, we were averaging about 900, and then you see that very significant increase. They've been going down. So as of this previous week, we were at 4,900. So they've been coming down. So yes, things are improving. But again, for example, Anchorage has halted dine-in service, and we're seeing now foot traffic slow down in quite a few places. So it's not clear whether or not we're going to see another spike. The other thing that's happened, and again, businesses or business owners that are listening know this better than I, but a lot of people, businesses have brought back workers with the usage of PPP in expectation that demand was going to come back. And if demand is not coming back, then we're going to find ourselves essentially over the next few weeks in basically the same place we were in March, where demand has not picked back up and they have to make decisions about whether or not to keep people on or to lay people off. And so again, the trend is good because we're going down. However, again, the income cliff, the expiration of benefits, and the resurgence of the virus have shifted these behavioral responses at the individual level. Next slide, please. I don't know how well you can see this, but what I did is I don't want to rant, but this is one of those things that, so what you see there, I'll have to explain. So the blue line shows you the difference in earnings between an individual that's unemployed receiving federal boosted checks plus state unemployment insurance, minus however much he or she was earning, depending on their income bracket. So, for example, that very left number on the blue line tells you that a person that was making $25,000 a year, if she lost her job, then she would be receiving through benefits $1,200 a month more than she would have been getting from her job. And so this is the thing that's gotten very contentious, this idea that there are a lot of people that are receiving more in benefits than they were in their wages. So during that first round of federal UI, anybody that was making less than $40,000 or $40,000 or less was quote unquote receiving better off or receiving more money from insurance benefits than they were from their previous wages, right? And so, and this has received a lot of attention. Now, the second line that has the numbers in orange shows you what happens to that difference when we cut benefits by half and we drop them to $300. And so then basically almost everybody, except for the person making $25,000, is making less in benefits than they would have made through a job. The reason I said this is a tricky thing to explain is because people are getting hung up on the fact that there are individuals making more money in unemployment than through their jobs. The issue here is, again, as I've said, there are about 40-some thousand people that are unemployed. Should we be talking about the disincentive of work associated with generous benefits, or should we be asking whether or not there exists 40,000 jobs to absorb all of these people, right? And so during normal times, there is a very good place for the conversation regarding disincentives. Right now, we're in a place where I don't think every data point that I've seen, we have fairly good information on job postings, tells me there aren't 40,000 jobs that can absorb everybody that's unemployed or the majority of people that are unemployed, right? So I think personally that the concern about the generosity of the payments disincentivizing people from going to work have gotten overblown. It's not to say that there is nobody that's being dissuaded from working because the benefits are generous. Of course that those people exist, but I'm saying at a macro level, are the benefits, is the generosity of the benefits what's causing 40,000 people to be unemployed? And I think that the answer is no, at least right now. So anyway, if the $300 goes into effect, and I think that the governor has decided that that's what's happening, essentially everybody that's unemployed is going to be getting less money. So if the desire was to eliminate this incentive to stay at home, then I think that that's been achieved. But again, the concern is now we have 40,000 people that are making considerably less money than they were before, which means that bills and rents are not getting paid and potentially evictions are going to rear their ugly head. So I think that that's one of those things that from a pure economic standpoint requires a little bit of digging. And again, this is not to say that the anecdotes are untrue or that some businesses are not having a hard time. It's more of a macro question. Next slide, please. I've said these three letters a lot. I dislike all of them. Everybody has been talking about what shape will the recovery take. I'll just go through them quickly because I'm sure most of you have heard them a lot. Most optimistic economic prognosticators were talking about a V. A V essentially basically says we're going to have a drop in economic activity and we're going to bounce right back up to the levels that we were at beforehand. I just don't think there is any evidence for that, whether nationally or at the local level, because again, the virus is still with us. People's balance sheets have been affected. We have a lot of business closures that are going to be permanent. And, you know, those are not recipes for a V. A U basically tells us that we have a drop in economic activity. We hover at the lower levels for quite a while, and then we come back out. One of the things that's important to note about the U is how long we stay at the bottom is immensely policy sensitive, which means that the generosity of the packages, what we end up doing as far as policy is concerned, is going to play a big role in how quickly we get back up to pre-recession levels. And then an L is the scenario we really don't want, right? Where we lose 40 or 50,000 jobs, and essentially we now have a new level of employment that's 50,000 below where we were, and we just stay there. But again, this is the good thing is that there are many things here that are policy sensitive, meaning how quickly the virus is contained, or whether or not people feel safe enough or comfortable enough or confident enough to go out is going to determine the path of this recovery. I've grown more fond recently of something along the lines of a Nike swoosh type recovery, where it's a gradual improvement in activity rather than anything that would result in some sort of snapback. But again, I think that these are all shorthand ways of thinking about the speed of the recovery. And the reality, as I'll say, I'm a regional economist by training, and so I think about heterogeneity quite a bit. No two places are going to have the same recovery. No two communities are going to have the same recovery. Dependence on different types of sectors is going to largely drive the speed, the shape of these adjustments. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'll tell you quickly where I see things essentially heading. I had a forecast before all of this came out that basically was saying that the state economy was going to grow at somewhere between 0.4 and 0.7%. I was along the lines of that 0.7%. As I said a little while ago, the Alaska economy went through its longest recession. We lost 11 or 12,000 jobs. Nobody was expecting that Alaska was going to be growing very fast. So it's important to keep that in mind, meaning that the level of employment and the pace of growth, even pre-pandemic, was going to be fairly modest. As a result of the pandemic, my forecast right now, and I'll talk a little more about it, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I make assumptions about the shape, says that we're going to not get back to pre-pandemic levels till after 2023. Essentially, what I have is by the end of 2022, we're going to be at about 95% of the pre-pandemic levels. Again, some people think that that's too optimistic. Some people think that that's too pessimistic. I can tell you that based on the assumptions I've made, that seems to be a reasonable path. Now, again, one thing that I'll talk about a lot, not to be too wonky, but there are things that confuse people when they think about this recovery is month over month, we're going to be seeing growth basically from now up until 2023 because the level of employment has dropped so much. And so if you just compare, for example, September to August or October to September on a seasonally adjusted basis, things are going to look good because the levels of employment have dropped so much. But if you compare, for example, August of 2020 to August of 2019, it's going to look incredibly ugly, as I'll show you in a second. And so, yes, we're going to be seeing growth in 2021, and I'm fairly comfortable that that's going to happen. We're going to see growth in 2022. But that growth is going to be much slower than the degree of the losses that we experienced. And so good news, bad news. Once you hit a level of employment that's incredibly low, there is nowhere to go but up. But again, we need to think about what are those catalysts that are going to get us out of this. This morning, I was going through TSA travel levels, and throughput in August of 2020 at the national level is at 30% of what it was the same week last year, right? So it's been going up, but it's going up really slowly, right? And so on March 15th or so, we were at 100% of last year's levels. We dropped to about 7 or 8% at its worst, and now we've been hovering in that 31, 35% range. And obviously, we know that Alaska is incredibly travel sensitive, not just through air travel, but that just gives you a sense of how far we are. And so even if throughput keeps improving, unless there is a vaccine tomorrow, I don't see it getting back to 100% in 2 months or 6 months. And again, everything that I'm going to say not only hinges on the policy response, but hinges on decisions at the state level, at the federal level, but also, again, about how quickly this virus is contained. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this basically just gives you the summary that I said a second ago. So really, by the end of this year, under fairly realistic assumptions, because we've obviously already gone through most of the year. If we do get a second package that's reasonably generous, I think that Alaska is going to end the year with about 25,000 fewer jobs than it did the previous year, which would be about 7.5% less than the previous year. And then we're going to see growth, again, that gradual growth that I was describing in 2021 and 2022. A lot of people ask me, well, where is the growth going to come from? It's this gradual return to work, people resuming normal activities. Even if we're not get back to 100%, stores are going to have to hire some capacity in order to meet demand by the households that do stay in Alaska. Next slide. Yeah, and I'll just leave this for a second, that I make some fairly significant assumptions. I talked about all of them. Oil prices stay stable. We do get a fiscal package, and then some containment of the virus. I don't mean a vaccine. I mean either a national mask mandate or social distancing measures that allow people to get back to normal spending patterns. I'm obviously not a public health professional, but we do know from other countries and other states that spending follows comfort around the virus, which means that even without a vaccine, if people feel comfortable spending money, they'll start going out, they'll start spending resources, and that's obviously good from an economic standpoint. Next slide. Yeah, and this is just showing you again what the picture looks like right now. So these are June numbers, and I want to show you where Alaska stands relative to last year. So the two numbers there are Alaska a year ago in June, Alaska now in June. So again, you can interpret the 2020 graph as a V, because again, we dropped and we got back up, but the level we were at a year ago is still much, much higher than where we are right now. And that gap is what we're going to struggle to get, right, to get back. And both Fairbanks, Anchorage, and basically every city in Alaska has this big bump in activity that happens over the summer. And that's just has not happened this year, and is obviously not going to happen because we missed out on most of the tourism season. Next slide, please. These are, you probably should look at these on your own later. These are just showing you every sector and how it's been affected by the pandemic. So I compare every sector's performance in 2020 by month to the previous year. The thing that you can take away is it's a sea of red, and red is no good. Those are declines, percentage change declines by sector in 2020 relative to 2019. And again, aside from federal government employment, which increased a little bit in one of the months, we've basically have had an across sector decline that's, again, improving, but we're still very far away from where we were previously. Next slide, please. This is the seasonality. All of you know this. The orange line is Alaska. The gray lines, I'm hoping you can see them, are every other state. And the reason I like this graph a lot, and I create it for most of my talks, is it just shows you how sensitive Alaska is to summer and summer activity. July employment statewide is 15% higher than January employment during normal years. And our seasonality is so much more pronounced than every other state's, which means that, again, taking away the seasonality or having a non-existent summer tourism season affects economic activity tremendously. And this is why our vulnerability to the pandemic is very, very different than that of many other states. Next slide, please. And we don't have numbers for Fairbanks specifically, but the Alaska Department of Labor produces numbers for the interior as a group. And non-farm employment, this is wage and salary employment, in June is about 11% lower than June of 2019. At the state level, we're about 10.5% lower. So Fairbanks seems to be more, or the interior seems to be more affected, at least thus far, or has had a more significant drop in employment. Next slide, please. And then this is the leisure and hospitality, because again, it's the sector that's lost the most jobs, both in Anchorage and Fairbanks and in every other city. And obviously leisure and hospitality matters, not just because restaurants are closing and a lot of people work in that sector, but as you all know, a portion of the tax base depends on tourism. And so this bleeds into local government revenues, which has very significant consequences for services, but also local government employment. And so it's important to basically make sure that we understand that I don't want to call them indirect effects, but there are non-sector specific effects that stem from leisure and hospitality that make their way into local government. And that sensitivity is very, very dangerous if, again, we don't end up getting some sort of rescue package for state and local governments at the national level. Next slide. And I'll go through these. Next slide, please. I'll go through these quickly because I want to leave a little bit of time. The oil price picture is really interesting. As you can see, the light blue is 2020, and then the dark blue is 2019. We had that very, very sharp drop. You can even see one of the dots is negative. We had that jump into negative territory for the futures in mid-April. And then we've had a recovery since. It's strange to say in Alaska that $40 oil prices are a recovery, but that's where we're at right now, right? And so we've essentially had oil prices higher than $40 since June 5th for every single day, which is typically not something to celebrate, but this is where we are. And, you know, we've got to take it, right? And so it looks a lot better than $20 oil prices. And as you can see, that range is starting to narrow between 2019 and 2020. For the year, we're still averaging about $25 less than we were in 2019. But again, it seems like at least right now, prices have stabilized because we've had 2.5 months, like I said, of above $40 prices, which I think is a positive given where we were at a couple months ago. Next slide, please. And then this is production. Again, we saw that very big drop that was a response to the oil price decline, and it also has picked back up. We're still averaging about 24 or 25,000 fewer barrels per day in 2020. But again, if you just shrink the window to the last month and a half or 2 months, it seems like we're back to 2019 levels, which is a positive. And so it's difficult to know where things are heading, but it seems like at least in the sector, which is obviously a driver of economic activity, we've made significant progress from the lows where we were at a couple of months ago when there were questions about ratcheting down production and keeping it low for months to go. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is employment. I mean, oil and gas employment's just struggled. In 2014, oil and gas employment was at about 14,500. As of June of 2020, we are at 8,600. So the sector has shrunk tremendously because of oil price pressure and because of international pressure. And so, again, I distinguish between what's happening on price and production and what's happening at the employment level. It's unclear how quickly, if at all, will companies start rehiring some of the people that they laid off. But I mean, this is where we are right now, and it's a very we had started seeing for the first time in 2019 a quote unquote recovery in employment in oil and gas. We saw a gain of about 500 or 600 jobs in the sector statewide, and then again we're seeing downward pressure just like we did those 3 years during the recession. Next slide. Yeah, you can skip this one. This is my forecast before the pandemic, which is completely irrelevant right now. And And then this is what I think is happening right now. As I've said, this just shows you 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. Again, the orange line is 2020. That's the big drop. If you compare 2020 to 2019, as I've said, for the year, I think we're going to be at about 25,000 fewer jobs when the year is over and you average throughout the year. And then we see this gradual increase. 2021 sees a bump in activity, and it's going to be a fairly big bump in terms of percentage change because the level we're at is so low. And then we keep on climbing in 2022. But as you can see, that maroon line is still well below the 2019 level, which means that we're not going to get back to pre-pandemic levels at the end of 2022. And that's basically where I think things are going at the state level. Next slide, we'll just go through these fairly quickly and then I'll stop. Like I said, I can't present a forecast without presenting caveats, both on the assumption side, but more importantly, you all know this better than I, but sensitivity to the pandemic is immensely driven or affected by industrial structure, meaning what are the sectors that drive your economy? How sensitive is local government revenue to tourism? How widespread is the virus? And so even when we talk about a statewide recession or the state's response to the pandemic, the reality is we have many economies within the state that have very different drivers, and the economic response, in my mind at least, needs to take all of those things into account. There need not be a uniform response to the pandemic. Cities, communities that are hard hit should be treated differently than ones that are weathering the storm, if you will, well. And I think that aid should be tied to the unemployment rate or to industrial structure or to the damage that has been ensued. Because again, as far as I'm concerned, the most important priority is to build a bridge that's solid enough for households, for communities, for governments and businesses to get us to the other side. So I think I'm just going to stop. There is some little detail after this that people can look at and they can reach out if they want. And then I'll let you drive.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we do have a few questions that have come in. Do you have time to go ahead and go through some of those? So the first thing that I wanted to address is you did make mention a couple of times that you encourage people to go back and look at this information. I'm going to take that to mean that you don't mind if we share this with people that ask for it.
No, please do. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So for those of you that are watching, Katie did put in the chat box her email address. If you send an email to Katie or let her know that you would like for her to send those slides over to you, we do have permission to do that, and we'd be happy to share so that you can go in and look at that sea of red, but hopefully maybe better news later in the slide deck. We did have one question that came in that asked if you had any estimates to the impact of unemployment due to the availability or lack thereof of childcare.
Yeah, there is a lot of very, very good research at the national level that's showing that, I don't have exact numbers, but there is very good literature that's showing that lack of care is a very big impediment to the recovery if/when it starts, right? And so I think that school openings, availability of care are absolutely necessary in order to have a full and sustained recovery. There is work that shows the relationship at the local level in some communities between availability and the number of people that are working from the office, number of people that are searching for jobs, but I don't have those numbers offhand. But like I said, there's been an explosion of work, economic work that's using real-time data and is showing some real insights on that front.
Great, thank you for that. For those of you that are listening online or paying attention online, if you want to type your question into the chat box, I can see that, and we'll be facilitating those questions as well. Another question that came in is that everyone understands that the leisure and hospitality industries you covered has been the most impacted. Tourism obviously is in that bucket. Are there any other sectors that maybe have been taking some heavy hits but maybe haven't gotten as much attention in the media or from the community?
Yeah, I mean, as I've shown you, basically it's a sea of red, right? And so I think local government's been a laggard, and I think it's going to be affected for a long time. Again, because of that linkage to travel, to tourism. Construction, professional and business services also got affected because of its ties to oil and gas, and because it's really high paid. And so, yeah, I think that government is going to be affected because of declines in oil prices, declines in revenues, and then we have, like I said, construction, professional, and business services. They bounce around a lot, but those are sectors that typically really explode in terms of activity during the summer, and we missed out on much of that activity this time around. And so, yeah, I would say those three, but the reality, like I said, is that there are no sectors that have escaped this. I'll just say one thing that surprised me is there's been a very, very significant drop in employment in healthcare, which was unsurprising. And in my forecast, I show that, or at least I think that the recovery is going to happen fairly fast there. But as of this past week, spending in healthcare is still about 50% lower than January levels. So the recovery there is much more sluggish than I would have expected it to be. And as you know, healthcare has been one of those very stable sectors in the Alaska economy. And we saw a lot of layoffs almost immediately when dentist offices were closed. And so we saw a lot of administrative type layoffs there, and it doesn't seem like a lot of them have come back.
A point of clarification: when you say that there was a downward spike in spending, do you mean consumer spending, sector spending, or both?
I mean consumer spending on healthcare services.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification. This is a good reminder to remind people that if you are in need of healthcare, it's a great time to go and receive that healthcare, that there are economic disadvantages of ignoring your health, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what I believe is our last question is, what is the most impactful policy that you would suggest, based on the information that you have, that policymakers make at either the local, state, or federal level to positively impact our economic health in our state?
Spend money, a lot of it. No, I mean, seriously, it really, I mean, I know that there are concerns about the deficit at the state level, at the national level, but really right now there needs to be bridges that are solid enough to get us to the other side, because I think that the consequences from spending too little can have really, really long-term lasting negative effects on the economy. There are very significant negative effects associated with long-term unemployment. If we have evictions, that's really difficult to get back up from. If we have mortgage defaults, those negative effects are going to weigh on the economy for a really long time. And so I think that as much as we're concerned about disincentives and about deficits, I think that the aid should be targeted. I'm not saying just drop money out of a helicopter, but target money, work with businesses, and work with communities at the local level, right? And so I am not a fan of uniform aid. As I've said, communities like organizations like yours have a much better pulse of what's going on there than people at the state level or at the national level. And I think that customizing aid to suit the needs of the people, the businesses, and the local communities in a way that's responsive, right? And so this is not a situation that we can wait 6 months on, unfortunately, because again, I really think that there is damage that we can't even see, even with this much better near real-time data.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Also,
Yeah,
I
thanks for
wouldn't
having me.
be a good chamber CEO if I didn't take the opportunity. Some of the information presented on your slide relevant to the oil industry and employment and challenges around low pricing. This would be a bad time in our state to negatively impact those businesses by another drastic change in tax policy for those. So from a chamber perspective, we do have a position to oppose the ballot measure that you'll see on your general election ballot in November. So we would encourage our members and voters in our area to vote no on that. And also, I was remiss earlier in the program not reminding people that today is primary election day. So if you have not gone to the polls and voted in the primaries, that's always an important decision to make. So I would encourage people to do that while I'm thinking about it. Again, thank you so much, Lucine, for joining us today and sharing your predictions and your information. You always say yes when we ask for you to share your information. So thank you again. And then thank you also to our listeners for joining us today. We hope that you'll join us next Tuesday, which is August 25th, for the third in our series of political forums, where you will hear from Fairbanks candidates for City Council. And that's all we have for you today. Be well, Fairbanks.